Hello, my name is Delaney Whitmore. I'm 35 years old, and 3 months ago, I spent almost 19 hours traveling from Seattle to North Carolina for my younger sister's wedding. When I finally arrived at the venue, exhausted from the flight and still dragging my suitcase wheels through gravel dust, my own mother stood in front of the entrance and told me to leave. She looked me straight in the face and said only family was allowed inside. Then she calmly informed me that I had never been invited in the first place. I remember standing there in the pale blue dress I'd bought weeks earlier for the ceremony, holding the wrapped gift I'd carefully packed into my carry-on luggage, trying to understand how someone could erase another human being while looking completely unbothered. My mother showed no guilt, no hesitation, no sadness, just cold certainty, like she had rehearsed the moment in advance. The part that made it almost unbelievable was this: every major contract for that wedding had my name on it. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, every deposit had been paid using my credit card. I signed every document myself because my family asked me to help. I never imagined I'd be treated like a stranger at the door of an event I helped finance. 3 days later, my mother finally called me. Not because she regretted what happened. Not because she wanted to apologize. She called because the final invoices had arrived, and someone needed to pay $38,000. Before all of that happened, before the humiliation and the phone calls and the silence that followed, there was a rainy evening last November when my sister announced she was engaged. I was sitting in my apartment in Seattle after work, listening to rain tap softly against the windows while I answered emails from my laptop. My phone lit up with a FaceTime request from my sister Emily. She was 27, freshly out of graduate school, still living 15 minutes away from our parents in Ashford Ridge, North Carolina. I smiled when I answered because despite everything complicated between us, I genuinely loved her. Emily's face filled the screen immediately. She looked glowing and breathless with excitement. Behind her, I could see our mother moving around the kitchen island pretending not to listen while clearly listening to every word. "I'm engaged!" Emily screamed before I could even say hello. She shoved her left hand toward the camera, showing off a huge diamond ring. "Jason proposed last night at the winery," she said. "It was perfect." I remember feeling honestly happy for her. For a second, nothing ugly existed yet. "That's incredible," I told her. "Oh my God, congratulations! Jason's family already offered the estate for the wedding," she said excitedly. "Can you believe it?" Of course I could believe it. Everyone in Ashford Ridge knew the Holloways. Jason Holloway came from old Southern money. His family owned car dealerships, commercial property, and half the local political donations in 3 counties. They had the kind of wealth people talked about quietly. "Mom, say hi to Delaney," Emily said. My mother stepped into frame wearing that same controlled smile she'd mastered years ago. The kind that looked pleasant from a distance but never reached her eyes. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "Pretty exciting, huh?" "It really is," I replied. "I'll start checking flights tonight." "When's the wedding?" There was a pause. A small one, but I noticed it. My mother glanced sideways at Emily before answering. "Oh, don't rush into buying plane tickets," she said lightly. "It's going to be very small." I laughed a little because I thought she was joking. "Mom, it's Emily's wedding. Of course I'm coming." "We'll see," she replied. Then she changed the subject immediately. Emily spent another 10 minutes talking about flowers, colors, and bridesmaid ideas while I listened and smiled, but something already felt wrong. I couldn't explain it yet. It sat low in my stomach like a warning I kept trying to ignore. That phone call was the first real reason I'd had to come home in over 2 years. I should have paid attention to how badly my mother seemed to want me to stay away. About 2 weeks later, my mother called me while I was at work. It was a Wednesday afternoon in Seattle, which meant she'd probably been awake for hours, thinking through exactly how she wanted the conversation to go. "Delaney, I need to ask you something practical," she said immediately. I leaned back in my chair because I already knew what was coming. "The venue needs someone with strong credit attached to the contract," she explained. "Your father and I still haven't fully recovered from refinancing the house, and Emily doesn't really have enough credit history yet." I stayed quiet while she kept talking. "The caterer needs the same thing. So does the florist and photographer. It's standard procedure." "How much are we talking about?" I asked carefully. "The total wedding budget is around 41,000, she answered quickly, like saying it fast somehow softened the number. "But the upfront deposits are only 3,500. The remaining balances won't process until after the event." $41,000 attached to my name. I rubbed my forehead. "Mom, that's a huge amount." "It's not your money," she said instantly. It's just paperwork. We'll handle everything afterward. We just need someone trustworthy on the contracts. I had heard promises like that before. When I was 23, I co-signed a truck loan for my father that wrecked my credit for years. When I turned 30, my mother convinced me to wire her $4,000 for a supposed roof emergency that later turned out to be Emily's tuition payment. But this was my little sister's wedding, and I was the dependable daughter, the successful daughter, the one with the tech salary and the good credit score and the life everyone conveniently relied on whenever something expensive came up. So eventually I said yes. I signed every contract that week without reading them carefully enough. Over the next few months, the wedding slowly came together while I watched the entire thing happen from a distance, like someone standing outside a brightly lit house during winter. Emily created a wedding planning group chat that apparently included bridesmaids, cousins, family friends, and half the town. I only found out it existed because she accidentally forwarded one of the messages to me. It was a picture of bridesmaid dresses with the caption, "Vote, girls." I wasn't included in the voting. I tried not to take it personally. I called Emily twice asking about schedules, seating charts, whether she wanted me to give a speech. The first time she said she'd let me know later. The second time she sent me to voicemail and texted an hour afterward saying she was too overwhelmed to talk. Whenever I asked my mother if there was anything I could help with, she gave the same response every time. "Everything's handled, honey. Don't worry yourself." I never received an invitation. Not printed. Not digital. Nothing. But I kept convincing myself that sisters didn't need formal invitations. Family was supposed to mean automatic inclusion. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, Emily posted rehearsal dinner pictures online. She wore a white sundress and stood surrounded by bridesmaids while my mother smiled proudly beside her. The caption read, "My whole family. My whole world." I stared at that picture for 11 straight minutes. Because I wasn't in it, and I hadn't even known the dinner was happening. I almost called her right then. I almost asked why I'd been excluded again, but I stopped myself. I kept making excuses for them in my head. Maybe the rehearsal dinner was only for the bridal party. Maybe they assumed I couldn't arrive early enough from Seattle. Maybe I was overthinking everything. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise to catch my flight. I'd used 5 of my 20 vacation days for the trip. My round-trip ticket from Seattle to Charlotte with a layover in Denver cost almost $1,400. The hotel in Ashford Ridge cost another $700 for 4 nights because the town only had one decent place to stay. Emily's wedding gift was a luxury cookware set she'd mentioned wanting during one of our video calls months earlier. That alone cost over $700. Before I even stepped foot in North Carolina, I had already spent almost $3,000. Somewhere over Colorado during the first leg of the flight, I opened the Notes app on my phone and reread the speech I'd been writing for weeks. It wasn't long, maybe 2 minutes total. I wanted to tell a funny story about how Emily used to force me to perform fake weddings with her stuffed animals when she was little. She always made me play the officiant instead of the bride because she liked being the center of attention even at 5 years old. I thought people would laugh. I practiced the speech quietly under my breath with headphones on, while the man sitting beside me slept against the airplane window. When we landed in Denver, I texted my mother. "Just landed. One more flight. Can't wait to see everybody?" She didn't respond for almost an hour. Then right before boarding, my phone buzzed. "Okay. Busy. See you tomorrow." That was it. No excitement. No safe travels. No, we miss you. Just 3 cold words and a period at the end, like she was answering a coworker instead of her daughter. I stared at the text while passengers lined up at the gate. For a second, I almost screenshotted it and sent it to my friend Nicole back in Seattle with the caption, "Is this weird or am I losing my mind?" But I didn't. I boarded the plane and kept telling myself things would feel normal once I got there. 19 hours of travel. 3 words waiting for me at the end of it. I arrived at the hotel in Ashford Ridge a little after 9:30 Friday night. The woman at the front desk smiled warmly when she saw my last name. "Oh, are you here for the Holloway wedding?" she asked. Apparently, the entire town knew about it. "Yes," I answered. "How lovely," she said. "You must be a close family friend." Something tightened in my chest. "Something like that," I said quietly. My room was small but clean. I hung my dress carefully inside the closet and placed Emily's gift on the desk near the lamp. Then I called her. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I tried texting my mother instead. Checked in. "What time should I get to the venue tomorrow?" An hour later, she replied, "Ceremony starts at 2. Nothing else. No, come early. No, your father wants to see you. No, let's have breakfast before everything starts. Just a time." I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror across the room. I had traveled across the country, spent thousands of dollars, signed contracts worth over 40 grand. And my own mother couldn't manage more than a sentence. The last time I'd been back in North Carolina before this trip was 2 years earlier for my grandmother's funeral. My mother barely spoke to me then either. She spent most of the reception afterward whispering with Emily and greeting neighbors while I stood awkwardly near the food table pretending not to notice. At one point, one of the churchwomen asked my mother how many children she had. She smiled and answered, "Just one daughter, Emily." I had been standing maybe 6 feet away holding a paper plate of baked beans and cornbread. I remembered that moment while ironing my dress in the hotel room Friday night. At the time, I convinced myself she misspoke. I told myself she was distracted and emotional from the funeral. Now I wasn't so sure. I ironed the dress slowly like I was preparing for an interview instead of a wedding. In a strange way, that's exactly what it felt like. Like I was constantly auditioning for a place inside my own family. I set my alarm for 8 the next morning and climbed into bed, but sleep refused to come. The walls at the hotel were paper thin. I could hear a couple down the hall arguing about a football game and someone else laughing loudly near the ice machine. But none of that was what kept me awake. It was the numbers. Almost $3,000 spent on the trip itself. $38,000 still tied to my credit card. Years of sending money whenever my mother called with another emergency. The broken furnace. Emily's insurance payment. Property taxes, medical bills that always seemed urgent until I realized later they weren't even real emergencies. Lying there in the dark, I started adding up something worse than money. I started adding up every moment I'd been quietly erased. Birthdays where my mother texted HBD right before midnight because she forgot earlier. Christmas mornings when I called and nobody answered because they were already celebrating somewhere else without telling me. The framed family photos in my parents' hallway that included dozens of pictures of Emily and almost none of me. I'd spent years pretending those things didn't hurt because acknowledging them would mean admitting something terrifying. I wasn't loved the same way. And if I kept living like this, if I kept paying and apologizing and showing up hoping things would finally change, eventually I would disappear completely inside their version of me. Not physically, emotionally. I would become the woman who bought everyone's dinners but still sat alone. The woman who paid for holidays she never really belonged to. The woman whose only value came from what she provided. Still, even after all of that, part of me believed the wedding would somehow fix things. Maybe my mother was just stressed. Maybe Emily was overwhelmed. Maybe tomorrow, once I walked through those doors, everything would soften. Maybe my mother would hug me and say she was glad I came. I held on to that hope because the alternative hurt too much. Eventually, I fell asleep sometime after midnight. Saturday arrived cold and bright. By 1:45 in the afternoon, I was driving down a long gravel road toward Briarwood Estate, the wedding venue sitting just outside Ashford Ridge. The property stretched across acres of rolling green fields with white fences, oak trees wrapped in string lights, and flower arrangements lining the pathway leading toward the reception barn. The place looked beautiful. Magazine beautiful. The kind of wedding venue people save on Pinterest boards for years. I parked near the back of the crowded lot beside a row of luxury SUVs and pickup trucks. Guests were already making their way toward the entrance, laughing and carrying programs. I smoothed the wrinkles from my dress, picked up Emily's gift, and started walking. The gravel shifted under my heels with every step. The air smelled like fresh grass and barbecue smoke drifting from somewhere behind the reception area. I spotted my father first. He stood near the entrance, wearing a rented navy suit that fit awkwardly across his shoulders. He was talking to another man when his eyes landed on me. The second he recognized me, his entire expression changed. His polite smile vanished. His eyes widened slightly, then dropped toward the ground. He didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't walk toward me. Instead, he turned around and disappeared inside the barn without saying a word. Something cold moved through my stomach. I kept walking anyway. About 15 feet from the entrance, the double doors opened again and my mother stepped outside. She wore a champagne-colored gown with pearl earrings and perfectly styled hair. Everything about her looked polished and expensive and carefully controlled. She stopped directly in front of me, not beside me, not greeting me, blocking me. "Delaney," she said quietly. "Hi, Mom," I answered. "I made it." She didn't hug me, didn't smile, didn't move out of the way. Instead, she folded her hands together and said the words that changed everything. "What are you doing here?" For a second, I honestly thought I misheard her. "I'm here for Emily's wedding." Her jaw tightened. "You need to leave." The words hit me so hard my mind actually went blank. "What?" "Lower your voice," she whispered sharply while glancing toward nearby guests. People are watching. Mom, I flew across the country. Her eyes hardened. Delaney, please don't do this today. Do what? I asked. I'm your daughter. She stepped closer then, lowering her voice even further until it became almost a hiss. Only family is allowed inside. I stared at her. My hands tightened around the gift box. What did you just say? You weren't invited. The world around me suddenly felt distant and muffled. Guests continued walking past us toward the entrance while pretending not to stare. Somewhere behind the barn, music drifted softly through speakers while wedding staff arranged chairs. Meanwhile, my own mother stood directly in front of me, pretending I didn't belong there. I signed every contract for this wedding, I said quietly. I paid the deposits. This isn't about money, she snapped. It's about what's appropriate. Appropriate. I could see through the partially open barn doors behind her. White chairs lined in rows, flower garlands hanging from the rafters, a string quartet warming up near the altar. Everything inside had my signature attached to it. My father appeared briefly inside the doorway behind my mother. He looked at me for exactly 1 second before looking away again. Hands shoved in his pockets. Silent, like always. Then another voice floated toward us from inside the barn. Warm. Confident. Southern. Everything okay out here? A tall, silver-haired woman stepped outside wearing lavender silk and pearls. I recognized her immediately from photos online. Victoria Holloway, Jason's mother. The woman my mother had apparently spent months lying to. The second Victoria looked at me, she smiled politely. My mother transformed instantly. Oh, everything's fine, she said sweetly. Just a distant relative who got confused about the venue. She said it while looking directly at me. A distant relative. I felt something inside me crack. Victoria frowned slightly. Oh, she said. I thought you only had one daughter. Silence. My mother laughed too quickly. I do. This is a cousin visiting from out of town. Cousin. Not daughter. Not family. Cousin. Victoria looked between us for another second, clearly sensing something uncomfortable hanging in the air. But before she could ask more questions, my mother gently touched her arm and guided her attention back toward the ceremony. We should probably head inside, my mother said quickly. Everything's about to start. Victoria nodded slowly, though her expression had changed. The easy warmth in her face was gone now, replaced by polite confusion. Well, she said carefully, glancing at me one last time, the ceremony begins in a few minutes. Then she disappeared back inside. The barn doors closed behind her, and suddenly it was just me and my mother standing there in the gravel while guests drifted around us, pretending not to notice. I looked directly at her. You told them I don't exist. It's complicated, she muttered. No, I said. It's not. Her eyes darted toward the parking lot like she wished I would vanish before someone else came outside. How long have you been doing this? I asked. How long have you been telling people you only have one daughter? She didn't answer. That silence told me everything. This hadn't been some impulsive lie. It was a version of reality she'd been building for years. I suddenly thought about every strange interaction from the past decade. Every holiday photo I wasn't included in. Every introduction where my mother awkwardly changed the subject when people asked about me. Every moment I felt slightly erased but convinced myself I was imagining it. I wasn't imagining any of it. She had been slowly removing me from her life piece by piece because I didn't fit the image she wanted to present. I lived too far away. I wasn't married. I worked in tech instead of settling down in Ashford Ridge. I was inconvenient. And somewhere along the way, my mother decided it was easier to pretend I barely existed. My chest hurt so badly I could barely breathe. Part of me wanted to walk straight through those barn doors and announce the truth in front of everyone. I wanted to stand in the center aisle and say, my name is Delaney Whitmore. I'm their daughter. I paid for this wedding. Every flower, every chair, every plate of food inside this building exists because of me. But I didn't. Instead, I looked at the gift in my hands. A cookware set Emily once said she wanted during a casual phone call months earlier. I crouched slowly and placed it beside the entrance. For Emily, I said quietly. Relief flashed across my mother's face so fast she probably didn't realize I saw it. She thought the situation was ending. She thought if I walked away quietly enough, none of this would have consequences. Thank you, Delaney, she said softly. This is really for the best. I held up my hand before she could continue. No, I interrupted. Don't explain it. For the first time all afternoon, her expression shifted slightly. Not guilt, fear. Because deep down, she knew something irreversible had just happened. I turned around and walked back toward the parking lot. I passed couples laughing together, women adjusting their heels on the gravel, men joking near the entrance while string music floated through the warm afternoon air. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked if I was okay. I reached my rental car, climbed inside, shut the door, and finally broke apart. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just silent, shaking tears running down my face while I gripped the steering wheel hard enough to hurt my hands. Even alone in a parking lot, I had been trained my entire life not to make a scene. I sat there for almost 10 minutes. Then the string quartet inside started playing the processional music. The ceremony had begun. I started the engine and drove away. In my rearview mirror, Briarwood Estate slowly disappeared behind trees and sunlight until it became nothing more than a blur in the distance. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I didn't slam doors or throw accusations. I just left. And strangely enough, leaving felt stronger than staying. The drive back to the hotel passed in complete silence except for the sound of tires against pavement. When I got to my room, I kicked off my heels and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my dress. My mascara was smeared beneath my eyes, and my hands wouldn't stop trembling. The speech I'd written for Emily was still open on my phone. I stared at it for a long time before deleting the entire thing. Then I opened my laptop. 4 unread emails sat in my inbox from wedding vendors. I clicked the first one. Briarwood Estate. Contract holder, Delaney Whitmore. Deposit received $1,200. Remaining balance due within 5 business days following event completion, $14,800. The second email was from the caterer. Balance due, $12,600. Then the florist. Then the photographer. Every single invoice carried my name. Every contract included my digital signature and my credit card authorization. Total deposits already paid, $3,500. Total remaining balance, $38,000. I closed my eyes. At that exact moment, my family was probably inside dancing beneath expensive lights, while guests toasted the newlyweds with champagne purchased under contracts tied to me. My own mother had introduced me as a cousin, and somehow I was still expected to fund the celebration. I sat motionless on the hotel bed while the numbers repeated in my head again and again. $38,000. My phone rang around 9:45 that night. The caller ID said Aunt Caroline. My mother's older sister. Caroline Whitmore had been a high school principal for 30 years and possessed the terrifying ability to detect lies before people finished speaking them. My mother called her difficult. Everyone else called her honest. I answered immediately. Delaney, she said without greeting, where are you? At the hotel. I didn't see you at the wedding. I swallowed hard. I was there, I said quietly. I just wasn't allowed inside. Silence. Then she asked one simple question. What do you mean? So I told her everything. The entrance. My mother blocking the door. The words only family. The lie about being a cousin. Victoria Holloway standing there listening to it all happen. My aunt didn't interrupt once while I spoke. When I finally finished, the line stayed silent for several seconds. Then she exhaled slowly. She told people you weren't her daughter, she said flatly. Yes. Another long pause. At the reception tonight, my aunt continued carefully, your mother gave a toast. She thanked Jason's family for welcoming our little family into theirs. She specifically mentioned herself, your father, and Emily. I closed my eyes. My aunt's voice sharpened slightly. I thought it was odd at the time. I almost said something. It's okay, I whispered. No, she replied immediately. It's not okay. I heard movement on her end of the line, like she'd stood up from a chair. Then her tone changed completely. Those wedding contracts, she asked. Whose name are they under? Mine. All of them? Yes. Silence again. But this silence felt different. Focused. Strategic. Then my aunt said something that would replay in my mind for months afterward. If your own mother told a room full of people you don't exist, she said quietly, then you do not owe that room $38,000. The next morning, I woke up to a notification from Instagram. Emily had uploaded wedding photos overnight. 14 pictures total. The first showed her and Jason standing beneath twinkling lights, smiling like a couple in a magazine ad. The second was a family portrait. Jason, Emily, my mother, my father, Jason's parents. 6 people smiling at the camera like they represented 2 perfect families joining together. One daughter missing. The caption read, surrounded by everyone who matters most. I stared at that sentence for a very long time. Then I opened my email again. The first invoice had already arrived from Briarwood Estate. cheerful automated formatting, elegant gold lettering in the header. Thank you for celebrating with Briarwood Estate. Your remaining balance of $14,800 is due by Thursday. The caterer's invoice arrived minutes later. Then the florist. Then photography. Every email addressed directly to me. Every payment deadline exactly the same. Thursday. $38,000 due in 4 days for a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend. I looked back at Emily's post again. Everyone who matters most. Something inside me changed in that moment. Not explosively. Not dramatically. It felt quieter than anger, like a lock finally clicking open after years of pressure. For most of my life, I had confused sacrifice with love. I believed if I gave enough, tolerated enough, paid enough, forgave enough, eventually my family would choose me back. But sitting alone in that hotel room Sunday morning, I realized something painful. People who truly love you do not erase you when you become inconvenient. And people who erase you do not get unlimited access to your wallet afterward. My phone buzzed around noon. Voicemail from Emily. Not a call. A voicemail. I pressed play. Hey Delaney, she said brightly. So the wedding was literally perfect. Seriously, everything turned out amazing. I listened silently while she continued talking about flowers, guests, and Jason's family loving the reception. Then her tone shifted slightly. Anyway, sorry things got kind of weird yesterday. Mom said it was probably better this way. It would have been hard to explain everything to Jason's family. Hard to explain. I closed my eyes. Then came the sentence that finally destroyed whatever hope I still had left. But thank you again for helping with all the vendor stuff, she continued cheerfully. Seriously, you're the best big sister ever. I replayed the voicemail twice. Not once did she apologize for me being turned away. Not once did she say she fought for me. Not once did she sound shocked by what happened. Because she already knew. That realization hit harder than my mother's rejection. Emily knew beforehand. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to stay silent. Enough to let me fly across the country anyway. Enough to smile in family photos while I sat crying alone in a hotel parking lot. And afterward, she still expected gratitude and payment. I set my phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling for almost an hour. Thursday. 4 days until the balances were due. For the first time in years, I stopped asking myself how to make everyone else comfortable. Instead, I asked a different question. What would happen if I finally chose myself? Sunday night, the hotel hallway was unusually quiet. The loud couple next door had checked out earlier that morning, leaving the entire floor strangely peaceful. I sat cross-legged on the bed with my laptop open and started researching contract law. The answers were simple. The person whose name appeared on the contracts held legal responsibility, but they also held authority, meaning I could approve charges or refuse them. I could also request that invoices be transferred to the actual event hosts. I stared at the screen for a long time before picking up my phone. Then I called Briarwood Estate. A cheerful woman answered on the third ring. Briarwood Estate, this is Megan. Hi, I said calmly. My name is Delaney Whitmore. I'm the contract holder for yesterday's Holloway wedding. Oh yes, Ms. Whitmore, she said warmly. Beautiful event. I almost laughed at that. I need to inform you, I said carefully, that I will not be authorizing the remaining balance on the account. Silence. Then her voice turned cautious. Okay, may I ask if there's an issue with the services provided? No issue with the services, I replied evenly. I simply was not present at the event, and I'm formally requesting the invoices be redirected to the hosts of the wedding. Another pause. I'll need to notify management, she said carefully. That's fine. She took down my email and promised someone would follow up Monday morning. Then I called the caterer. Same explanation. Then the florist. Then the photographer. 4 phone calls. Less than 15 minutes total. I never yelled. Never threatened anyone. I simply repeated one sentence over and over in the calmest voice possible. I do not authorize the charges. When the final call ended, I closed my laptop, brushed my teeth, and climbed into bed. For the first time since arriving in North Carolina, I slept through the entire night. Monday morning, I changed my flight home. Originally, I planned to stay through Wednesday to spend extra time with family after the wedding. Now I booked the earliest flight back to Seattle. I packed in less than 10 minutes. At checkout, the same woman from the front desk smiled at me politely. How was the wedding? She asked. I paused. Then I gave the most honest answer I could. Unforgettable. The drive back toward Charlotte took almost 2 hours. Along the way, I passed through downtown Ashford Ridge one final time, the diner where my father used to take us after church, the Baptist church where I got baptized at 13, the small hardware store where my mother bought Christmas decorations every winter, then finally the street where I grew up. I slowed briefly as I passed my parents' house. The porch light was still on, even though the sun had already risen. I imagined what was happening inside. Leftover wedding cake in the refrigerator, cards stacked across the kitchen table, my mother replaying the reception in her head like it had all gone perfectly, my name never mentioned once. When I was 10 years old, my mother used to tell me something constantly. You're the older sister, Delaney. You have to be strong for Emily. I had spent 25 years being strong, strong through Emily's childhood illnesses, strong through financial disasters, strong through lonely holidays spent in Seattle while pretending distance was the reason nobody called, strong every single time I swallowed hurt and called it maturity instead. As I turned onto the highway leading out of town, I realized something. Strength without boundaries eventually becomes self-destruction, and I was finally done destroying myself for people who treated my love like an obligation instead of a gift. 19 hours later, I landed back in Seattle under gray skies and cold rain that somehow felt comforting after everything that had happened. The second my phone reconnected to service, I checked it automatically. No missed calls. No texts. No messages asking where I was. Nobody in my family had noticed I left early, or if they had, nobody cared enough to ask why. But I knew they would notice soon. The vendors would begin calling within a day or two. The invoices would start reaching the right people. Questions would follow after that. And eventually my phone would ring. It happened Tuesday morning around 9 o'clock Seattle time. My mother's name lit up across the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Hi, Mom. Her voice sounded unnaturally sweet. Delaney, sweetheart. How was your flight home? Fine. Well, good. Listen, I just got the strangest call from the wedding venue. There it was. I walked slowly toward my kitchen window while she continued. They said you removed payment authorization from the contracts. There must be some mistake, because they're saying the remaining balance is due immediately. No mistake, I replied calmly. Silence. Then carefully, what do you mean? I mean, I removed my authorization. Another silence, sharper this time. Delaney, she said slowly. The balance is $38,000. I know. How exactly do you expect us to handle that? I looked out across the rain-covered courtyard outside my apartment building. You handle it yourselves. Her voice changed instantly. Excuse me? I'm not financially responsible for a wedding I wasn't invited to. Oh, don't start this again, she snapped. You're being dramatic. I laughed softly, because the word dramatic suddenly sounded ridiculous after everything that happened. You told Jason's family I was a distant cousin. That situation was complicated. No, I said quietly. It was deliberate. She inhaled sharply through her nose. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. $38,000 is a proportion. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she switched tactics. Your father is under an incredible amount of stress right now, she said coldly. His blood pressure has been awful since the wedding. I closed my eyes. There it was. The guilt. The weapon she always reached for whenever accountability got too close. If something happens to him because of this, Dad stood there and watched you turn me away. I interrupted. He made his choice too. Another long silence. You're punishing your family over a misunderstanding. No, I said softly. I'm finally reacting to years of being treated like I don't belong. You always make yourself the victim. The words should have hurt more than they did. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Maybe because for the first time in my life, I wasn't scrambling to fix things. You told me only family was allowed inside, I reminded her. So the family bill belongs to the family. Then she hung up on me. No goodbye, just silence. I stared at my phone for a moment before setting it down on the kitchen counter. My hands weren't shaking. My chest didn't feel tight. For the first time in years, I felt completely clear. 40 minutes later, she called again. This time, she skipped the fake sweetness entirely. Do you understand what you've done? She demanded immediately. Yes. The venue keeps calling me. The caterer is forwarding invoices with your name crossed out and hours written underneath. I leaned against the counter. That sounds inconvenient. Inconvenient? She nearly shouted. This is humiliating. I let the silence sit between us for a second. Then I answered quietly. I imagine it feels similar to being called a cousin at your own sister's wedding. That is not the same thing. You're right, I said. Mine didn't come with a bill. She started crying then, but not real crying. Not hurt crying. Angry crying. The kind designed to make someone else feel guilty. I raised you, she said. I sacrificed for you. I fed you, clothed you, drove you to school every day for years, and now this is how you repay me? I rested my forehead briefly against the cool kitchen cabinet behind me. You can raise a child and still hurt them, I said quietly. Those things can both be true. You are tearing this family apart over one little incident. One little incident. As if erasing me publicly was some harmless misunderstanding. As if years of emotional neglect could be summarized into one afternoon outside a wedding barn. Finally, she said the thing I think she believed would break me completely. I'll tell everyone what kind of daughter abandons her own family over money. I laughed again softly this time. Go ahead, I said. I'd rather be the daughter you criticize than the daughter you pretend doesn't exist. That stopped her cold. I actually heard her breathing change on the other end of the line. You don't mean that. I do. Silence stretched between us. Then came the final move, the most powerful one in her arsenal. Your father could end up in the hospital over this stress, she whispered. If he has a heart attack, that's on you. I closed my eyes slowly. She had used my father's health against me for years. When I moved to Seattle, when I stopped sending money immediately every time she demanded it, when I skipped holidays because I was exhausted from trying so hard to earn affection that never came freely. But something inside me had changed now. Dad's health belongs to him and his doctor, I replied calmly. Not my credit card. Then she hung up again. This time I didn't stare at the phone afterward. I simply made coffee and sat quietly by the window while rain slid down the glass. Wednesday morning, the family phone chain officially activated. Emily called first, crying hard enough that I could barely understand her at first. Delaney, please, she sobbed. Jason and I just got married. We can't afford this. I stayed silent. If you don't pay the invoices, we have to take out loans, she continued desperately. You're ruining the start of our marriage. I waited a few seconds before speaking. Did you know beforehand? What? Did you know Mom planned to turn me away? Her crying softened immediately. Then came a long pause. She said it would just be easier this way, Emily admitted quietly. Jason's family is very traditional, and she thought explaining everything about you living across the country and not being married and… I actually laughed in disbelief. Explaining what? That I exist? It wasn't personal. The sentence hit me harder than yelling would have. Not personal. Like being erased from your own family tree was somehow logistical instead of cruel. You knew, I whispered. I didn't think she'd actually make you leave. But you didn't stop her. Emily started crying again. Can we please just focus on the bill right now? And there it was. The real emergency. Not my humiliation. Not my heartbreak. The money. Maybe Jason's family deserves the truth, I said quietly. Then she hung up too. Later that afternoon, my father called. My father almost never called anyone. Hearing his voice unexpectedly felt strange, like hearing from someone I used to know years ago. Your mother's upset, he said awkwardly. I know. Another silence. Then carefully, could you maybe reconsider this? Just for the family? I closed my eyes. Dad, I asked quietly, did you know Mom was telling people she only had one daughter? Long silence. Finally, he exhaled heavily. It wasn't exactly like that. Were you standing there when she called me a cousin? No answer. Then the line disconnected. He hung up without another word. Every single one of them disappeared the second the conversation became honest. And for the first time in my life, I stopped chasing after them when they did. Thursday morning, the same day the vendor balances officially came due, my Aunt Caroline decided she'd had enough. Unlike the rest of my family, Caroline never believed silence solved anything. She believed silence protected the wrong people. Around 10 that morning, she called Victoria Holloway directly. Later, she told me every detail. Apparently, she got Victoria's number from the wedding program she'd slipped into her purse after the ceremony. That was such a Caroline thing to do that I almost laughed when she told me. According to her, Victoria answered warmly at first. Caroline, how lovely to hear from you. My aunt skipped small talk completely. "I'm calling because there's something you deserve to know," she said. And then she told her everything. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just facts. My mother had two daughters. Not one. The older daughter lived in Seattle. The older daughter signed every contract attached to the wedding. The older daughter flew across the country only to be turned away at the entrance. And the woman introduced as a distant cousin was actually my mother's firstborn child. Caroline told me Victoria stayed silent for nearly 10 full seconds after hearing all of it. Finally, she said quietly, "I beg your pardon?" My aunt repeated herself calmly. "She paid for the wedding deposits herself," Caroline explained. Then Diane publicly denied she was her daughter. Another long silence. Then Victoria asked the question everyone eventually asked. Why would Diane do something like that? Caroline's answer was simple. You'd have to ask Diane. But I can tell you this. Delaney showed more grace walking away quietly than my sister deserved. Victoria thanked her for calling. Then she hung up. Ashford Ridge was the kind of town where secrets survived only until lunchtime. By evening, people already knew something had happened. By Friday, everyone knew exactly what happened. I didn't realize how fast the story spread until my phone started buzzing with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old classmates, distant cousins, church women who suddenly remembered I existed. Most of the messages danced around the truth politely. Heard there was some wedding drama. Hope you're okay. Thinking of you. But beneath every carefully worded sentence sat the same realization. People finally knew I existed. Not because my mother acknowledged me. Because someone finally refused to stay quiet. Thursday afternoon, I sat at my desk in Seattle with a fresh cup of coffee beside my laptop and formally closed every remaining door. I emailed all 4 vendors individually. The messages were nearly identical. Professional, brief, clear. I stated that I did not authorize any further charges to the card on file and requested all remaining invoices be redirected to the event hosts, the Whitmore and Holloway families of Ashford Ridge. Every vendor responded within hours confirming the changes. One even apologized for the inconvenience. Then I called my bank. I canceled the credit card attached to the contracts and ordered a replacement with a completely new number. That was the moment it became final. $38,000 would no longer land on me automatically. The deposits were already gone, of course. $3,500 I would never recover. Add in flights, hotels, transportation, and Emily's wedding gift, and I'd lost over $6,000 total. $6,000. I sat quietly at my desk thinking about that number. Oddly enough, I didn't feel angry anymore. Mostly, I felt embarrassed that I had spent so many years believing love had to be earned through sacrifice. $6,000 was expensive, but compared to another decade of emotional manipulation, honestly, it felt cheap. That evening, I walked along the waterfront near my apartment while cold wind rolled in from the bay. Seattle looked gray and restless the way it always did before rain. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not happy exactly, but free. Friday morning, I sent one final email. Recipients: my mother, my father, Emily. I drafted it 3 different times before settling on something simple enough to leave no room for argument. Mom, Dad, and Emily. I have formally removed payment authorization from all wedding-related contracts associated with Emily and Jason's event. Remaining balances have been redirected to the appropriate parties. I will not discuss financial matters related to the wedding any further. I sincerely wish Emily and Jason a happy marriage. If any of you ever want a genuine relationship with me moving forward, it must begin with honesty instead of obligation. A Delaney. I reread it carefully 4 times before sending. No cruelty, no insults, no threats, just a boundary, clean and final. Then I closed my laptop and stood quietly near the kitchen window, watching rainwater collect along the sidewalk below. My apartment overlooked a small courtyard with one crooked maple tree that constantly dropped leaves onto the neighbor's bicycle. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I paid for it myself. I built my life myself. Nobody there questioned whether I belonged. And standing there in that quiet apartment, I finally realized how exhausted I had been for years. Every interaction with my family carried invisible calculations. Am I helping enough? Calling enough? Sending enough money? Being understanding enough? I spent most of my adult life trying to earn emotional security from people who only offered conditional acceptance. The wedding simply exposed the truth in a way impossible to ignore anymore. I didn't send that email to punish them. I sent it because I finally understood something important. If I kept abandoning myself to keep them comfortable, eventually there would be nothing left of me. Aunt Caroline kept me updated on the fallout afterward. Apparently, Victoria Holloway called my mother the same afternoon Caroline revealed the truth. According to local gossip, the conversation was icy from the very beginning. "You lied to our family," Victoria reportedly said. My mother tried defending herself by calling it a private family issue. Victoria wasn't interested. "Private?" she replied. "Your daughter funded this wedding and you threw her out at the door." Then came the real disaster. Jason found out everything. Not a softened version. Not my mother's version. The actual truth. He confronted Emily that night. "You have a sister?" he asked her. "An actual sister." And according to Caroline, Emily started crying immediately. Jason apparently couldn't understand how an entire marriage had begun with a lie so massive. "You let me believe she was some random relative," he told her. Emily kept repeating the same phrase over and over. It was complicated. But some things aren't complicated. Cruelty isn't complicated. Erasure isn't complicated. Humiliation isn't complicated. And eventually even Jason realized that. Their first serious marital fight happened less than a week after the wedding. Over me. Over money. Over lies. In the end, Emily and Jason took out a personal loan to cover the remaining vendor balances. Jason's parents reluctantly helped co-sign because their family name was attached to the event, and they didn't want legal trouble following them around town. The fairy tale wedding now came with monthly payments. Ashford Ridge loved gossip the way small towns always do. Within 2 weeks, everyone knew the core version of the story. Diane Whitmore hid her oldest daughter from the Holloways. That daughter paid for the wedding anyway, then got thrown out before the ceremony started. At church one Sunday, one of my mother's longtime friends apparently stopped her in the parking lot and casually asked, "Diane, I never realized you had two daughters." My mother tried her usual script. "Delaney lives far away. We've grown apart." But by then, the story had already escaped her control. Too many people knew the truth. Too many people had started comparing notes from years of strange interactions they previously ignored. My mother eventually stopped attending that church entirely. She started driving to another town on Sundays where nobody knew the Whitmore family history. My father grew quieter too. According to Caroline, he stopped sitting outside in the evenings and barely spoke during family dinners anymore. Guilt finally has weight once you stop pretending not to feel it. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying all of it alone. About 3 weeks after the wedding, Emily finally texted me again. The message arrived while I was eating lunch alone at my desk during work. It was long. Rambling. The kind of text someone writes while crying, but still trying to make themselves sound innocent. "Delaney, I know everything got out of control, and I'm really sorry things happened the way they did. Jason's furious, and his parents barely even speak to me now. The loan payments start next month, and we're already struggling with apartment expenses. I know this is a lot to ask, but could you maybe help with part of the balance? Even a little would help. I promise we'll pay you back eventually. You're my sister, and I really need you right now." I read the message 3 times, not because it confused me, because I was searching for something that never appeared. A real apology. Not one sentence in the entire text acknowledged what happened to me. Not one line said, "Mom should never have turned you away." Not one line said, "I should have stopped it." Not one line said, "You deserved better." The entire message focused on Emily's problems, Emily's stress, Emily's marriage, Emily's bills. My pain existed only as background damage inside her financial crisis. That realization hurt more than I expected. Because even now, after everything, part of me still wanted my little sister to choose me emotionally, instead of strategically. I set my phone down for a few minutes before replying. Then I typed carefully, "Emily, I truly am sorry you're struggling right now. But I can't help financially." The boundary I set was never only about money. It was about finally being treated like family instead of an inconvenience. When you're ready to talk honestly about what happened instead of the invoices, I'm willing to listen. I sent it and put my phone away. She never responded. Not that day. Not the next week. Not even the following month. And honestly, I wasn't surprised anymore. Emily had spent most of her life learning the same lesson my mother mastered years earlier. Love from me was expected. Accountability toward me was optional. About a month after the wedding, something unexpected happened. My father emailed me. Not texted. Emailed. My father hated emails. He barely understood half the features on his phone and usually communicated in short sentences about weather, football, or whether somebody's roof needed repairing. So when I saw a message from him with the subject line simply reading Dad, my chest tightened immediately. I opened it slowly. Delaney, I know I should have said something that day at the wedding. I didn't. I stood there while your mother handled everything, and I kept my mouth shut because that's what I've always done. I don't really have an excuse for it. The truth is, I was a coward. I should have walked you inside myself. I'm sorry. We're handling the wedding bills now. You don't need to worry about that anymore. I just wanted you to know I've been thinking about it every day. Dad. I read the email 5 times in complete silence, then once more on the train ride home, then again sitting alone on my couch with all the lights off. It didn't magically repair anything. It didn't erase decades of silence. He still hadn't stood up to my mother directly. But it was honest. Painfully honest. And for the first time since the wedding, someone in my family acknowledged the truth without twisting it into guilt or excuses. I didn't reply immediately. Part of healing, my therapist later explained, is learning not to rush yourself emotionally just because other people suddenly become uncomfortable with consequences. So I waited almost a week before answering. Dad, thank you for saying this. I'm not ready to pretend everything's okay yet, but your honesty means more than you probably realize. I'm still hurt. But I heard you, Delaney. He never replied after that. But strangely enough, he didn't need to. The silence between us no longer felt dishonest, and that alone changed something. 6 months passed. Winter turned into spring. Seattle stayed rainy as always. Life kept moving. I got promoted to senior software engineer at the company where I'd worked for 4 years. During my performance review, my manager praised my ability to remain composed under pressure. I almost laughed hearing that. If only she knew. I also started therapy seriously for the first time in my life. Not because of the wedding itself, because of everything before it. My therapist introduced me to a phrase I'd never heard before: functional over responsibility. The belief that if you become useful enough, dependable enough, generous enough, people will finally love you safely. That sentence described my entire adult life. Every emergency payment, every expensive flight home, every moment I swallowed hurt because being easy to love felt safer than being honest. I realized I had spent years confusing emotional survival with loyalty. Aunt Caroline and I started having video calls every other Sunday. She drank coffee. I drank tea. Sometimes we talked about serious things. Sometimes we talked about television or recipes or weather. But every conversation carried one quiet truth underneath it. She saw me. Not as useful. Not as dramatic. Not as difficult. Just as family. She occasionally updated me on Ashford Ridge, too. Apparently, my parents had managed to pay down part of the wedding debt using retirement savings. Emily and Jason continued making loan payments every month, which caused constant arguments between them. According to Caroline, Jason genuinely tried to make the marriage work. But trust built on lies fractures easily, especially when the lies involve an entire human being erased from existence. Victoria Holloway remained polite toward my parents publicly, but distant. The warmth disappeared permanently after the truth came out. As for my mother, she never apologized. Not once. According to Caroline, she referred to the entire situation as Delaney's tantrum. I used to think hearing that would devastate me. Instead, it mostly made me sad for her. Because imagine being so terrified of accountability that you rewrite reality instead of facing your own choices. I don't hate my mother. That surprises some people when I say it. But hate requires emotional closeness. And by the end of everything, what I mostly felt was grief. Grief for the relationship I kept trying to earn. Grief for the version of family I wanted so badly I ignored reality for years. My mother loved appearances. She loved harmony. She loved control. But unconditional love? I'm not sure she ever learned how to give that freely. And maybe part of becoming an adult is accepting that your parents are just flawed, people carrying wounds they never healed themselves. That understanding doesn't excuse what happened. But it helped me stop asking impossible questions like, why wasn't I enough? Because the truth is, I was always enough. I just kept offering myself to people incapable of receiving me properly. For years, I believed boundaries were cruel. I thought saying no made me selfish. I thought protecting myself meant I was abandoning my family. Now I understand boundaries differently. A boundary is not revenge. It's not punishment. It's the moment you decide your pain deserves acknowledgement too. The moment you stop volunteering yourself for emotional harm simply because it's familiar. That wedding cost me over $6,000. Flights, hotels, Deposits. Gifts. Therapy afterward. Expensive lesson. Worth every penny. Because for the first time in my life, I stopped begging for a seat at a table where nobody truly wanted me. And once I stopped begging, I realized something incredible. I could build my own table instead. One where love didn't depend on usefulness. One where honesty mattered more than appearances. One where I never had to earn belonging by sacrificing myself piece by piece. I didn't lose my family outside that wedding barn in North Carolina. I lost the fantasy of who I hoped they were. And honestly, that loss finally gave me my life back. Sometimes the people who hurt you the deepest are the same people who taught you to stay quiet about pain. And sometimes the hardest thing you will ever do is stop fighting for a place where you were never truly welcomed. I spent years believing love meant sacrifice, that if I gave enough, forgave enough, stayed patient enough, eventually I'd be chosen too. But real love doesn't erase you when you become inconvenient. Real family doesn't make you prove your worth over and over again just to stand in the same room. Walking away from that wedding wasn't the moment I lost my family. It was the moment I stopped losing myself. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not revenge. Not anger. Just finally deciding that your heart deserves the same loyalty you keep giving everyone else. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever felt invisible in a room where you should have been loved the most, then you already understand. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stop begging for a seat at someone else's table and finally build their own.